I'm Brandon Collins, and I'm a mustard expert. I'm going to literally sit here and eat this whole thing. Yellow mustard to me is the quintessential American mustard. There are some purists or mustard purists that feel that yellow mustard is not necessarily the ideal mustard, but to me, all mustards have a place, and yellow mustard definitely has a place in American nostalgia. So with mustard B, it seems that there's a little bit more turmeric in there than in mustard A, whereas in yellow mustard, turmeric is a primary ingredient. I'm going to think that mustard B will taste a little bit more like the yellow mustard that I grew up on, whereas mustard A may have a little bit more of a muted turmeric flavor. So yellow mustard usually contains a thickening agent. With A being a thicker mustard, I would assume that A may be slightly less expensive because there's just more of a thickening agent and probably less mustard seeds involved than what is located in B. B is probably a more pure mustard. And with that being said, that's really all I can tell by looking at it visually. Let's give it a taste. So whenever we taste, we're going to taste with wooden spoons, utilizing metal because of the acid and the mustard. It would actually start to create a reaction in your mouth, and you don't really want that. So we're going to start with mustard A. So initially I'm going to pick it up and take a smell. So whenever I smell it, I get a sweetness, followed by a little bit of acid. So again, that's something that I would expect, which is a good sign in a yellow mustard. And then we're going to taste it. Initially, it's sweet, finishes with the vinegar, so exactly as it smells, but it tastes like yellow mustard. It's delicious. It's exactly what I would expect from a yellow mustard. On to mustard B. It's not sweet. It has this acid note at the beginning, followed by a little bit of heat. You can actually see that this is textured, which could be an indication of a higher quality mustard. This is the quintessential yellow mustard flavor. A lot of turmeric, a lot of vinegar, a little bit of sweetness at the end. From a flavor standpoint, that to me is exactly what I'm looking for in a yellow mustard. A little bit more so than an A. Right now, I'm going to assume that B is actually a little bit higher priced than A, but from a cost standpoint, I don't necessarily think that it will be a drastic difference. So with all that being said, let's see which one is which. So, whew, got it right. That's always a plus. These are actually farther apart in price than what I had thought they were going to be. So with all that being said, I would be perfectly happy with both. I absolutely love Dijon. One of my favorite types of mustard all time, hands down. Dijon is typically looked at as the higher end mustard. It's just a really, really cool and very versatile mustard. So Dijon as we know it was created in 1856. This is actually in Dijon, France. Some of the characteristics of it is it's going to be spicy. It's going to be fairly smooth on the palate. So visually, side by side, they are drastically different in color. Mustard A has this dark brown, almost oxidized color. What that's telling me is that one of two things have happened. There's a lot of the hull left in this, so that they didn't actually process it 100% the way that I would assume Dijon would be processed, or it was allowed to oxidize. So that means the air was allowed to get to it, which is okay with mustard. It's an antibacterial thing, so it's something that can actually sit out and take color. The color on B is nice and golden. You do see that the little bit of the hull that's in there, the little brown specks. It looks like it's just going to be exactly what I want it to be. Water, mustard, salt, and a little bit of either vinegar or wine. Being that this is my favorite type of mustard, I'm very excited to dig into these. Get an awful lot of vinegar initially. It's almost like a sweet vinegar smell. I don't get a lot of spice at all. Barely any heat at all. Very sour. A little metallic. The metallic taste may be from the type of vinegar that's being used. It's not pleasant, to say the least. So now on to B. Okay, completely different. This smells like mustard. Smells like the mustard seed. It smells like vinegar. Now for a taste. That's Dijon mustard. That's spice. It travels up through your nose a little bit. It's not so hot that you can't stand it. I taste the mustard. I taste a little bit of vinegar. I taste the salt. So whenever you're shopping for Dijon mustard, flip over the back of the bottle and find ones that only contain mustard, water, salt, vinegar. Spices probably cover up the flavor of the Dijon, whereas you really want that mustard seed to shine through without being compromised by some other flavor. So that being said, B is definitely going to be the more expensive mustard. Let's see if I'm right. Yeah, exactly. So personally, A, it's not a bad mustard. There's definitely a place for it. Put it into like a pasta salad with balsamic vinegar, but it's going to impart a sweeter, acidic note to your dishes. Whereas with me, if I'm looking for a Dijon, this is exactly it. I could sit here and eat this whole thing, which may be a little weird, but it's delicious, and I really, really enjoy this type of mustard. So whole grain mustard is a really cool style of mustard. It's a mustard that has a lot of texture to it. Something that I really enjoy is that pop. It's almost like a caviar. The really cool thing about it is that it's basically pickled mustard seeds. This is one of the original varieties of mustard. Between the two, there are very obvious differences whenever you're looking at A and B. A to me looks like it's something that somebody has taken a lot of time to make sure it came out correct, that the seeds were nice and whole, and that a lot of them weren't bruised or damaged. B doesn't necessarily look bad, just that with A, we've definitely allowed those seeds to become fully hydrated, whereas with B, we've cut them up a little bit and allowed them to become hydrated that way. I have a general idea of what I think might be the more expensive one. We're gonna start with A. There's a nice acid. There's a sweetness to it as well. And you can really smell the mustard itself. Texturally, it's really, really cool. It's these little bitty balls of mustard seed that are suspended in this liquid. So the thickness is a mixture of both the natural thickening properties of the brown mustard seed and the actual sugar content in the liquid that it's suspended in. From a flavor standpoint, it has a really, really cool pop. Just like if I was eating caviar, it's got the acid, it's got that little bit of bitterness, and it's got the salt, it's got the sweet, and it's got the little bit of heat. A very, very good showing for a whole grain mustard. And now with B, whoa. So this actually smells like there's spices in it. I don't get acid as the very first note. I get spices, then I get acid. I don't really get a ton of mustard. Texturally, it's nice and thick. You can tell that there's some suspension. I want it to taste like mustard first, whereas this tastes like a spice that is then followed by acid, that is then followed by mustard and a little bit of heat. Whenever I'm eating a whole grain mustard, I want that pop. And this just really doesn't have it because it is so broken down already. It's not a bad thing, it's just not what I'm looking for whenever I'm looking for a whole grain mustard. I think B to me is definitely gonna be a little bit lower in cost than A. And the spices are actually very overpowering. Whenever they are that predominant, it's telling me that they may be trying to cover something up. I guess let's see if I got it right. Exactly what I thought. So to me, at the end of the day, A is amazing. So amazing that I'd even eat it on ice cream. It's a great mustard. So spicy brown mustard, it's one of those American mustards that we have all kind of grown up using and utilizing. It's just a little bit more nuanced than yellow mustard. There are also different varieties of spicy brown. There's the deli mustard, there's the Creole mustard in Louisiana. Initially, between A and B, you see the A is definitely more yellow. It looks like there is turmeric or something that's been added to it. You can see the specks, you can see the texture, you can still see that hull is still intact in there. As far as the inclusions go, one of the things that you really see is the fact that they haven't pureed the brown mustard seeds completely, and that's a defining characteristic of a spicy brown mustard. So from there, we'll go into tasting. We're gonna start with A. Again, very similar to what you do with yellow mustard. You get a lot of acid, you get a sweetness, and there's a little bit of heat on the back end of the nose. Texturally, these inclusions, the brown mustard seeds, the hull, everything that you, again, expect to see whenever you are looking at a spicy brown mustard. And then from a flavor standpoint, initially, you get a little bit of the turmeric, you get some vinegar, some sweetness, a very fine showing for what you expect a spicy brown mustard to be. So for B, it's actually has a little bit more of a fruity smell. You get vinegar. There's not really a lot of heat. We'll see if it comes through whenever we taste it. Texturally, it feels thicker than sample A. So the thickness is more than likely coming from the seed itself. So whether it's a higher quality, whether there may be a little bit more sugar in here, but it's definitely not an unnatural thickening agent. There's definitely a fruitiness. So whatever vinegar they're using is a fruitier vinegar than in sample A. Fruitiness is more than likely, I'm assuming, coming from whatever vinegar they're using. So if they're using an apple cider vinegar versus a white distilled vinegar or something of that nature, there's definitely some sort of a more fruit-forward vinegar being utilized in this. But all in all, both of them are very good showings for a spicy brown mustard. That being said, I'm going to assume that B is more expensive just because it has a more artisanal flavor profile to it, but I prefer A. So let's see if I am right. Oh wow, that's drastically different than what I thought it was. I mean, I knew there was going to be some sort of a gap, but that is a rather large gap. Both mustards, definitely delicious. B has its place, but whenever it comes to a spicy brown, A has definitely got my vote. So we've tried a couple of mustards today. There's a ton out there, so get out there, utilize it in different ways: condiment, spice, a seasoning, flavoring. Find a different mustard, play around with it, just have a lot of fun exploring the world of mustard.